Okay, hello everyone. Welcome and namaste to you all. Welcome to this webinar on Indo-Nepal relations, Ideation for resolving Kalapani issue, being hosted by AIDIA, a foreign policy think tank based in Kathmandu. So today on panel discussion, Zoom roundtable talk, we have 4 speakers. I would instead say young foreign policy scholars from both Nepal and India. We have with us Dr. Bawa Singh. Dr. Singh is an associate professor at the Center for South and Central Asian Studies, School of Global Relations, Central University of Punjab. Dr. Singh's areas of specialization includes geopolitics of South Asia and Central Asia, Indian foreign policy, maritime security, and regional cooperation, among others. He has also been contributing articles in the Modern Diplomacy, The Diplomat, Eurasian Review, South Asian Monitor, IPPR, SADF, AIDIA, and many others. Next, we have with us Dr. D.V. Subedi. Dr. Subedi is a postdoctoral research fellow at the University of England, Australia. He has worked as a lecturer in the School of Government, Development and International Affairs at the University of South Pacific in Suva, Fiji, 2018-19. He is also a senior fellow at the Center for Security Governance in Canada and a research member in addressing the violent extremism and radicalization into terrorism research network at Deccan University in Melbourne. He has conducted research fieldwork in South and Southeast Asia, especially Nepal, Sri Lanka, and Myanmar. Similarly, we have with us Mr. Rishi Gupta. Mr. Gupta is a senior fellow at AIDIA. He is an Indian Council for Social Science ICSR doctoral fellow at the Center for South Asian Studies, School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, India. He is regular contributor to the Indian English Daily, The Pioneer. With 10 years of research experience, he has extensively written on Nepal's political, security, and foreign affairs. And we have with us Mr. Bikram Timilsina. Mr. Timilsina is a PhD researcher at the School of Government and International Relations, Griffith University. In his PhD project, he is examining the roles played by external actors in Nepal, conflict resolution, and peace process in his PhD projects. More precisely, he is seeing how India, China, and United States influence the trajectory of Nepal's peace process through military, economic, and diplomatic engagements. His key research interests are civil war and ethnic conflict, external intervention, conflict resolution, geopolitics, and small and major powers. So coming to today's topic, before formally coming to the topic, I would like to welcome every panelist once again. Welcome you all, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rajib.
Thank you so much. So coming to today's topic, Indo-Nepal relations, Ideation for resolving Kalapani issue again. And we know that relation between Nepal and India has the foundation based on the close historical, cultural, religious, and people-to-people ties. However, the strategic ties between them is based on Sugauli Treaty that was signed between the British East India Company and the Nepalese regime in 1816 that demarcates the Nepal-India border. In November 2019, the issue is India issued a fresh map including the disputed territory of Kalapani as its one, while Nepal too was consistently claiming as Nepal's one. So the tension was further escalated when 80 kilometers Lipu Lake Road was inaugurated by the Indian side through Nepal territory. Nepal sensitized the issues, calling it as unilateral act. The objection was raised, calling for a diplomatic solution over the issue, but Indian side denied the Nepalese concern. So consequently, Nepal also launched its fresh map, claiming all the disputed territory as its one. And this has stemmed the diplomatic fallout between Nepal and India concerning the solution towards the border dispute. So with this as a backdrop, I would like to start with opening remarks. And may I request Dr. Bawa Singh to make his opening remarks. Sir, over to you, sir. Bawa, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. So, sir, basically, you have already laid out what the background of the dispute between India and Nepal. So, my argument over Indo-border dispute is, I would like to call it as a black swan event, which is basically, the proponent of this event, black swan event, is Nassim Nicholas Taleb, who was a finance professor, and he referred Black Swan event as basically coming as a surprise event, which has major effects, or you can call it as wider ramification. So basically, Talib's Black Swan theory refers only to unexpected events and laws, magnitude, and consequences, and their dominant role in the history related to various kinds of events like uh, border dispute, etc., etc. So having said so, basically when this uh, Professor Nicholas referred Black Swan event as surprising and having wider ramification. So in this background, I would like to make my argument saying that there are many wider ramifications in the backdrop of border issue between India and Nepal. Both the countries have a lot of wider ramification in terms of like economy, defense, security, politics, etc., etc. So in case like Nepal is a landlocked country, so if we make the border more turbulent, and I think it would become very serious concern for both the country, like particularly for Nepal, which is very landlocked country, and for that country particularly, connectivity becomes a major challenge. In case if it depends upon China, then China would not be suitable connectivity project for China. Sorry, Nepal. So similarly, number of people have been Nepali people have been working in India. So they are sending a lot of remittances and pension to back to Nepal. Similarly, India is largest trading partner of Nepal. A lot of investment is coming from India to Nepal. Lot many people from Nepal have been working in India. And similarly, development assistance as the program of ITech basically being going to Nepal. So in that sense, China, and Nepal, and India having wider ramification in case the issue becomes very turbulent in the near future or even present. So similarly, defense security issues will be become very major challenge for both the countries. Reason being, a considerable number of Nepali people have been working in Indian defense forces, and similarly, like uh, uh, Nepali defense forces officers as well as young men, they are getting training in India. And if we take this issue at the no, if we take this issue at the larger level, then it becomes having a lot of regional implications, particularly in terms of SARC. SARC already being dysfunctional region, being a lot of arc rivalry between India and Pakistan. So it has become more or less dysfunctional. But if we add one more controversial issue for SARC, I think whatever the identity of SARC, so far it will become negligible in the coming time. So SARC has wider implications on part of borders between India and Nepal. And similarly, if we take for any region, economic cooperation is one of the most prominent determinant for realizing the economic development and success, etc., etc. If you put across SARC, vis-a-vis like European Union or ASEAN, then SARC is standing nowhere. Reason being, internal trade, inter-trade of European Union, it stands for about 75% intra-trade. Similarly, ASEAN is having around about 35 intra-trade. So whereas if you put across SARC vis-a-vis all these institutions, you will find only, I mean, less than 5% of the trade is there. So this means a lot of economic economic implications for SARC. Similarly, security issues there, and multilateral development also would also become a major issue for SARC. So In case if we take border issue, my opinion is no, there is no border dispute between India and Nepal. Reason being, both countries have been sharing around about 1800-kilometer border. And no, as per I think if we take the no, some statement on part of Ministry of External Affairs of India, I think 98% of the boundary disputes border between India and Nepal has already been properly demarcated, and only left I think 2% border is left unresolved, which no maybe in near future if they put no diplomacy in practice, I think that could also be resolved. So, in my opinion, how a border become a question of border dispute when it is open and porous. So, like, if we take Indo-Nepal relations very briefly into account, and I think we should not the border dispute a very serious concern between both the countries. Reason being, India and Nepal no relations. If we take India and Nepal relations into account, then no Indo-Nepal throughout the recorded history, I think it has been remained very unique. Reason being, open borders, people to people contacts of kinship and cultural. And if we take a geo-cultural and relationship between India and Nepal, I think the bilateral relationship has been made very, very unique. Reasoning, Buddhism has taken place in Nepal, and it has been spread across India, and not only in India, I think many countries of the world. Similarly, Hinduism has taken place in India, and if we take the census of Nepal of 2011, I think more than 80% of the Nepalese people coming belonging to Hindu religion. So in that sense, I think religiously, culturally, and civilizationally, we are very close to each other. And moreover, no, in context of Indo-Nepal relation, we used to say this is roti beti ka rishta. So in that sense, we are enjoying very, very close cooperation between both the countries and between both the countries. And if we take a political relationship, I think in 1950, one of the treaty which characterized Indo-Nepal relations, and since then I think the Indo-Nepal relations have been remained very close. But no, later on, I think when KP only government has taken place, that time, I think this Indo-Nepal treaty has become one of the bilateral agreement between India and Nepal. And I think when 2015 constitutional problem has taken place between both the countries, and economic blockaded on part of India. Unofficially, I cannot say it is officially, but I think it is unofficially has taken place. Then 1950 Indo-Nepal peace and friendship treaty has become one of the bilateral irritant, which has given a lot of anti-Indianness among the Nepali people. That apart, but overall, I can say no, Indo-Nepal relations has been remained very, very close and cordial. Similarly, if we take the economic cooperation between India and Nepal, India is Nepal's largest trading partner, as well as Nepal has been remained largest source of India has been remained the largest source of foreign investment. Similarly, transit and trade treaty between India and Nepal has taken place 1989, and since then I think Nepal is a landlocked country, and no, it is getting connected with the outside world through India. So, number of Indian companies have been working in Nepal, where most of the important sectors like manufacturing, power, tourism sectors are there, where Indian companies are investing a lot of money investment. Similarly, a lot of development aid and assistance has been going under the ITEC program to Nepal. Connectivity programs are there. So in that sense, if we take Indo-Nepal relationship, very taken into account, I think more or less the bilateral relationship has been remained very, very close and cordial, except a few bilateral irritants like trade deficit, trust deficit, and later on when this communism related some problems has taken place. So I will not go into detail how I think my number of co-panelists will discuss into detail what is the history of border dispute between Indo-Nepal, what is the Sagoli Treaty of 1816, and how the border has been demarcated between both the countries, and how this border dispute for a long time, more than 100 years after 1816, uh, more than 100 years it has been remained dormant. And when Nepal became democratic country, then how it starts figuring prominently between Indo-Nepal relations as a border dispute. So as far as my view, how to resolve the border issue in the recent past, uh, Indo-Bangladesh border issue has been resolved amicably between India and Bangladesh. And if Indo-Nepal governments take proper and positive measures through the diplomacy, using all the four track diplomacy, diplomacy 1, 1.5, 2, 3, and 4. I think India and Nepal very amicably Indo-Nepal border can be resolved. So in this view, my argument is this: Indian government is in a very strong position, and recently it has resolved many pestering issues at the local level. If you take Indian politics into account, like lot major issues were there, like Ram Temple issue was there, Kashmir issue was there, triple talaq issue was there, and this government is very in strong position. They took strong decision making steps, and have resolved all the pestering issue between before the Indian government. Concomitantly, if we say Indian Nepali government is also in strong position, and in that background, I would like to say, both governments could take strong decision in the direction of resolving this bilateral issues, like border dispute, and we sorted out through employing track diplomacy, like border dispute, Mahakali river issue, trade deficit, trust deficit, even the Madeshi issue can also be sorted in that way. This is how I think both countries can live peacefully, and their amicable relationship have positive impacts bilaterally and multilaterally. And what I think the most important issue, bilateral issue between India and Nepal is, sometimes we know Nepal is sandwiched between India and China. So when Nepal has been ruled by communistic government, they had inclined more towards China. I think that is the major issue on part of India. And recent in the backdrop of border dispute, when Indian defense chief has given statement, I think that statement has not gone well with the Nepal, where he said Nepal has become or Nepal has been taking steps on the behest of China. I think that has not gone down well with the Nepalese people, and a lot of problems have taken place between India and Nepal. And I think turbulent borders means to divert a lot of fund for traditional security, which needs to be, those funds can be channelized for the public welfare and real issues of the common people. If we take India and Nepal, a lot of problematic issues being faced by common people of the both countries are there, but those common issues have not been taken into account by both the countries. Migrant labor issues are there, health issues are there, human security issues are there, water issues there, food security issues there, stunted health issues of children are there. So poverty.
Bawa sir, I think you have covered really a lot in initial remarks. We also need to speak later on on the specific terms. We have research questions as well. We'll come back to you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you so much. You have really made a good remarks about it. You have literally covered everything on India-Nepal relations, and from connectivity issue to geo-religious and geocultural, geopolitical, intra-regional trade, and the SARC issues. I think you have also mentioned about a security risk in South Asia and how Nepal is sandwiched. Maybe we can say, instead of landlocked, maybe we can be land linked as well. And you have also mentioned about people-to-people ties and how our Nepalese Gorkha regiments are serving in Indian forces, and how we have military and other kind of relationships of various strata. Thank you so much, Dr. Bawa, sir. Now, I would like
Thank
to
you,
go
sir.
for Dr. Devi, sir, for your opening remarks. Floor to you, sir.
Thank you, Rajib ji. So how much time do I have? 7 to
10 minutes for initial remarks. Then
cool.
Then we'll again come back for the other questions.
Sure. All right. Okay. I'll try to keep myself short this time. All right. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Bawa Singh. Actually, yes, you did cover a lot of ground on this issue, a very contentious issue, I would say. I just want to touch on perhaps some of the points you have already raised and try to unpack it from my perspective, because I don't pretend here that I'm a geographer, because we are talking about a border dispute where a lot of issues actually concerns with the border demarcations and so on and so forth. But my approach today, and of course that's because of my background, is I'm looking at this issue from a bit of peace and conflict perspective, a bit of political international relations, and a bit of political sociological perspective. Because in my view, the relationship between India and Nepal is so complex that one particular disciplinary view is incapable or inadequate to unpack the complexity of this relationship, and particularly the matter of border dispute, because as we know, border are not just the boundaries. It's not the physical boundary. It represents our sense of nationalism. It represents our emotion. It represents our living in livelihood. It represents our security and sovereignty and so many things. So I think my view at the outset in this discussion today is that we have to be very careful in terms of unpacking these issues very carefully in terms of economic, security, political, social, cultural, and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, this issue re-escalated in a very difficult time. Both countries, India and Nepal, of course, the whole world is going through this pandemic, unprecedented crisis, so to speak. And actually it shifted the attention from managing the pandemic to, focusing on something more sensitive and contentious. So the question is, why did this issue escalate? As Dr. Bawa Singh already mentioned, there is a very big ramification of these border disputes between Nepal and India. Not just because Nepal and India share almost 1,800 kilometer borders, but also because of our historical ties. And it's been very long time, we have been talking about India and Nepal has historical, cultural, sociological relationships. We have these roti-beti narratives, but I mean, I'm afraid this kind of very idealist, culturalist narratives of roti-beti relation hasn't worked when it comes to our bilateral relationship. So in my view, I think it's time look beyond that roti-beti relationship. Roti-beti relationships are, the basis of our cultural, social connections between these two countries. And oftentimes when it comes to hard issues, the issues that are guided by the realist perspective in international relations and diplomacies sometimes ignore this kind of cultural facts. And we have seen this when it comes to border issues between South Asian countries in Asia. So the question is, why did these border issues re-escalated in a difficult time? We knew this issue would be sooner or later escalated, because we know Kalapani and Susta are the disputed borders. Both countries have agreed that these are disputed borders, you know. So when it is a disputed borders, then I know the dispute will one day surface from peace and conflict point of view, conflict management point of view, if it is not managed properly. And historically speaking, in last 100 years or so, you know, at least with the 70 years history of India's independence, and Nepal existed even before that as a nation state, these issues has not been resolved. We will come back to that point, why we didn't resolve this issue earlier, what were the institutional barriers, what were the diplomatic barriers. We need a separate discussion. Perhaps the next questions will touch on that. But I want to briefly touch on 4 key points. Unlike in India, I mean, of course, this is a reality in whole of South Asia, but more so in Nepal, that, you know, our identity and our sense of collective identity is very much attached to the land. So anytime when there is any disputes or debates regarding or concerning the land, it provokes sort of a nationalist sentiment. And, you know, Indian authorities and even you know, the narratives that's on the Indian side, unfortunately, is that it is creating anti-Indian sentiment. We'll come back to that point later. But the key point we shouldn't forget here is that our collective identity and our sense of emotion is so much attached to the land that land matters so much in our everyday life, in everyday politics, in our economy, and so on and so forth. The second issue is that perhaps it touches a bit about why we are not able to resolve this problem very recently, and why this issue is being aggravated, you know, put it that way. It's because historically Nepal and India used to have leader-to-leader connection. BP Koirala, Manmohan Singh, Ganesh Man Singh, Krishna Prasad Bhattarai, you could name many more who fought for Indian independence, you know, and so did the Indian leaders, a generation of Indian leaders who were so much attached to the Nepal sovereignty and helped the country to get independence from the 104 years of Rana's oligarchy. So historical basis here is that we have a very strong leader-to-leader connection. Unfortunately, that leader-to-leader connection, which used to be a facilitating factor to resolve India-Nepal problem, has actually broken over the times, because the reality is that our diplomacy has been somewhat shifted from leader-to-leader connection to the bureaucratic level. So when it comes to the bureaucracy has a different mindset. It functions differently than how it functions in the political spheres between the two leaders. So clearly we have to look at how bureaucracy has also become a barrier to this issue. That's another point. And more importantly, the international practice is that when any issue is not resolved at a bilateral level, it goes at a regional or, you know, a forum, any forum beyond bilateralism. And in other cases, like in Southeast Asia, for example, or in Europe, in Western Europe, even Eastern Europe, so far I know, there are preventive diplomacies. There are mechanisms for preventive diplomacies. But so far in South Asia, we don't have any preventive diplomacy mechanisms. So in the lack of preventive diplomacy mechanism, every issue has been reduced back to the level of two countries, you know. And when there are unequal power relations between those two countries, and when there is enough economic dependence rather than interdependence, these kind of issues becomes problematic and complicated. We can unpack these issues later. The third is that in the you know, since the last 20 or 30 years, and particularly after the war on terror and the shifting political and geopolitical and security dynamics, much of the India's foreign policy with its neighboring countries has been shaped by security narratives and the narratives of nationalism. To some extent, the narratives of nationalism to some extent shapes bilateral and diplomatic relations in most of the countries. But in India, it is shaping rapidly, the bilateral discourse. We also have to look at how that is impacting these border issues. So my conclusion as an opening statement, this is a very complex problem, but I can hear, a lot of discussions are going on. I'm joining these forums and webinars on these issues almost every week. And I see, people are so much talking about the evidence, what Nepal has, what India doesn't have. I think that's not the crux of the problem, because both countries knows what is the problem, because evidence is there. Nepal has its own evidence, India has its own evidence. The problem for now, and this is very probably, some people might not agree, but I would want to look at these issues from the perspective of state behavior. How these two states are so adamant that they are not moving forward to resolve these issues. So for me, this is an issue which concerns with this behavior of the state, attitude of the states to each other. And it is at that point, I think we have to concentrate this discussion, and we have to concentrate our bilateralism and our foreign policy, and how we can actually go beyond very traditional culturalist narratives of Indo-Nepal relations to moving forward to acknowledge the changing geopolitical order, political realism, and how these are shaping the state's attitude to each other. I think I should stop here, and perhaps, I'll be happy to unpack what I just talked about over the time. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Divi. So I think you have made a very important remarks, touching everything from border to how it is related to emotions, livelihood, and security of people. It's not just about the physical identity, but also the emotional identity that we are attached when it comes to border, and how it has emerged during the unusual time of COVID-19. And I think you have also touched on the looking beyond from people to people ties than traditional way of emancipating it from roti to beti relations and things like that. And you have also mentioned about the barrier to preventive diplomacy in South Asia, and how instead of a leader-to-leader connection, how bureaucracy to bureaucracy connection have been made, and these are maybe the preventive measures, preventive diplomatic measures in South Asia. Now I would like to go for Mr. Rishi Gupta for his initial remarks. I think he has made a presentation, right, Rishi, sir?
AIDIA and Sunilji for letting me speak on the issue. Since a lot has been spoken about, and as Subedi ji also mentioned about that, it is not about the contestation that we have officially and unofficially. It is about the nature of the dispute that we have to understand. So what, as a scholar, foreign policy I can offer is something that I'm going to talk about in next 10 minutes. And for that, let's understand, is a border issue between India and Nepal something new? The answer is absolutely no. Are the two countries face to face for the first time? Again, the answer is no. They have been face to face, and really, for past weeks, attending the seminars and just going through the narrative that India and Nepal have cultural, roti beti ka relationship. That narrative, I don't think so. It is, it fits into the present issue. Then what is something that has brought the issue in limelight? Well, it's the nature of existing understanding between the two countries. Understanding about the changes that have occurred in these two countries in last 70 years, especially in Nepal in terms of politics, geography, media, and so on. It will not only help to make sense of the issue, but also put us on the mode of sorting the ways to resolve it. Now, going by the political changes in India and Nepal, we all will agree that, that 1950 treaty and India's, basically the Shah, reinstating of the Shah rule in 1950 and India's independence in 1947 are no more the same. The way Nepal was and the way India was born, they are not the same. Both have evolved to be better in their own right. In 70 years of its inception, India has turned out to be a thriving and biggest democracy in the world. It has been able to project its potential as a strong economy, strong diplomatic power, and a large population has worked in India's favor. On the other hand, Nepal has evolved politically since 1950. From an absolute monarchy to panchayati system, then partial democracy, and then autocracy, and finally winning back the democracy and in its full sense after a 10 years war. India and Nepal began their formal journey with the signing of 1950 Treaty of Peace and Friendship. The treaty had well captured the moment when it was signed. Ousting of the Ranas and reinstating of the Shah rule was a special moment for both India and Nepal. That is how this special category was built. On the other hand, India could sense the vulnerabilities of a geographically small nation. When I say geographically, please do not take me otherwise. So vulnerabilities of the geographically small nation about its security, considering Tibet was on the boil and nothing could stop, China. Therefore, India signed the treaty to create a sense of confidence in Nepal to ensure that it posed no threat. Also, trade, transit, and every other deal to Nepal was expected to deliver India's security concerns in return. Therefore, each and every provision in the treaty was well in line with the time and space. Now the two countries do not have the similar circumstances. India is a nuclear power, so is our northern neighbor China. Nepal has worked on to build a considerable relationship with China, meaning China will not pose a threat or become a potential threat in the future. There are international laws and agencies to ensure no country is victim of its geography. Let's understand this. Unlike in the past, today Nepal is one of the biggest contributors to UN peacekeeping missions in terms of deploying its soldiers. Meaning the world is well aware of Nepal's contributions in the global affairs. So let's accept Nepal and India have come a long way on the political front, and both have emerged well in their own ways. So why not change the circumstances and change the situation that 1950 treaty was signed, and at present what is being demanded should be taken into the perspective. Now I come to the power of pursuance. Of their 56 years of diplomatic relations, India had a single center, as Subedi ji also discussed about that, leader to leader connect. So India had the single center of power to deal with in Nepal. It was the king. In case of a dispute, India could well approach the king. Remember in 2006 when king was hell-bent against the Maoists and its people. It was then the Indian MP Karan Singh who could convince the king not to stand against its people. It was at the behest of the people of Nepal, that India proposed something. Why did Nepal allow an audience to Karan Singh? Because it was believed that if not diplomatic envoy, family relations between Shah family and Karan Singh will work for sure, and it did. At present, the decision making in Nepal has become more diverse compared to the past. Even if Prime Minister Oli is the center, he has advisors. There is also an opposition, and above all, an active public opinion. Therefore, India needs to understand that we may have shifted from twin pillar policy in principle. We need to revise it for real and consider new political actors in Nepal. Now coming to geography, it has been emphasized in the past, and I would emphasize it too, and former speakers have also talked about it, that Nepal is geographically a smaller and a landlocked country between two Asian giants, as it is always projected, namely India and China. But it has been 30 years since globalization was born in 1990, and the world has changed tremendously. Borders are a geographical and political reality, for sure. But I do not think, in these times, borders are impenetrable. As the old Chinese saying goes, they can build bridges anywhere. So it doesn't matter. We can, beat around the bush of the narrative that China and Nepal have, high mountainous terrain and roads are really troublesome. So trade is not possible. I do not think so that it is impossible in the present circumstances. Similarly, an open border and a visa-free regime was more than enough for students and migrant laborers to move to India. It was something that had worked in generating goodwill towards India. we can recall that in the tensed circumstances like 1989, people-to-people ties had eased out bilateral relations. While Nepal understood the cost of permit system in India, India understood the cost of losing the goodwill. So both worked out some way, and the issues were resolved. But 2015 did not see the same. The results were not the same. People in Nepal are migrating to other countries for work and study, especially to Malaysia and Middle East. So the kind of goodwill India could generate through people coming to India and having some kind of leniency towards India, that is not there. You cannot expect, or India cannot expect, that it will remain intact for years or centuries. That is changing. As the joke goes, banks are ready to loan and employment agencies are working round the clock to ensure they are cut. Therefore, geography and political borders cannot be means of defense for India anymore. In the context of changing media, media has played a fabulous job in talking about this issue, and I think they know very well about what actually the matter is, rather than anybody who is working on the specific issue. So I remember mushrooms used to be a rare delicacy some 20 years back. Then there was a rise in the demand, and it became a household vegetable. I must say a fungus, indeed. So basically mushrooms mushroomed. Well, media in these two countries has mushroomed like anything. While traditionally India was always well equipped with broadcasting, Nepal was still limited. Then came the internet age and everything changed. Mobiles became the new eyes and internet became the new connectivity. Cheap, best, and everywhere. So more individuals in India and Nepal have kind of media houses, websites, YouTube channels, and social media handles, and everybody has an opinion. So that's a different story, that misinformation is the new reality, and we and now we as a younger generation do not bother to look for facts and reality, barring few. So therefore, while India needs to understand the social media generation in Nepal, Nepal, on the other hand, needs to avoid working under the pressure of social media. If we can recall what was happening during last year, Kalapani issue had come. Sorry, there is no electricity here. When the Kalapani issue had come, and the first impression that the government of Nepal had given to the media, that it has come to the notice of the government through media. I'll say not media, but through social media. So can we risk our diplomacy for the sake of what media says, or can we act upon the the opinions that social media is creating? Absolutely not. So diplomacy is usually considerably the first and the last resort for a conflict to resolve, and Nepal could have pressed India through diplomatic means to create pressure, be offensive. That Nepal is doing right now. But indulging in bad mouthing because you do not feel happy or because others say so, I do not think so. That is that is done for good for the long term. Not as an Indian, as a researcher, I would, and a student of diplomacy, I would say that the media in India is equally to be blamed. But I'm happy that Ministry of External Affairs did not go by the media pressure to badmouth Nepal for what was happening. So let's understand, it is not a debate about big or a small country. It is about, and nobody is intending to wipe out each other. It's an issue that needs to be resolved. So we also need to look at the changes in the leadership. We both have very popular leaders in their own respect, and we have Prime Minister Modi and there is KP Oli, and both are determined towards building a nation. But what we can see is that sometimes two popular leaders and their images contrast, and they do not sometimes it is called plus plus becomes minus, but here plus plus is becoming more plus. It's going, it multiplies, and somewhere the resolution is not getting done. So although we can see that when Prime Minister Modi came, we saw neighborhood first had come, and it had become the baby of India's foreign policy towards neighbors. And then eventually we saw a fallback. And but I would say determination at the initial stage was really good. We can say we can recall few incidents that like Motihari, Amlekganj pipeline was inaugurated. That was pending since 1996. Nothing was done. 2014, Modi came and decisions were taken, and it became a reality. And in 2016, we saw that EPG was formed. I'm very sad as a student of Nepal studies and foreign policy, and meeting the leaders, those were part of, or the experts, those are part of EPG. Every time I hear from them something that it's very pessimistic, rather what optimism it had created. The EPG group, despite the final report is submitted, it is under still wraps. I understand there are technical things to be worked out, but let's face it, sooner than later, why not work on it presently, and based on the consensus deploy the solutions. There might be differences, but something can be worked out. So now, to conclude, India needs to look at the changing Nepal. In 2008, Maoists had initiated a call for New Nepal. Not sure if New Nepal has emerged yet, but I'm sure that it is not a different Nepal. India cannot ignore developments such as national security policy of Nepal that was released in the aftermath of blockade episode in 2016. The new version of the policy, the national security policy, categorically mentions blockade as a national security threat to Nepal. From 1950 treaty to national security policy, the two countries have come far away, and it's no good. Just see a policy that says, that doesn't name India but says blockade as a biggest threat, and a 1950 treaty that says mutually respect each other. So we have come far away, on security terms, on political terms. And last but not the least, Chinese presence in Nepal is undeniably a long-term challenge to both Nepal and India. People in Nepal may say, last year, January and February, for a month I was in Nepal, and I was interacting with a lot of leaders, including your ex-defense ministers and your present foreign policy advisor to Prime Minister Oli. The sense I could get from them that China is somewhere a new actor, and somehow it is creating faith. But let's face it, when I say it's a challenge to Nepal, I say it for all good, because it has become a narrative that India takes example of Sri Lanka or other African countries to avoid to get away from its own wrongdoings. But I'll say Nepal should also consider that they are the realities. Bringing China into Nepal, especially into the political stream, everybody knows that the role played by the Chinese ambassador in Nepal, micromanagement that is being done. I do not think that it will do good for long term. And however, India needs to sit across the table before it's too late and resolve the border dispute, because border dispute is just a symptom of the existing long-term problems that India and Nepal both have. Thank you. You're not audible, Rajib ji.
Okay, it was on mute mode. I'm sorry. I think, thank you so much, Rishi sir. You have made a very important points from historical perspective to contemporary security risk perspective, be that assumed or real. As a researcher, you have made a very good points. And you have also mentioned about how nations have, how two different nations have a different kind of birth history. And you have mentioned about how India is also interested in its own security risks, security threat through Nepalese territory concerning the China in the north. And you have also mentioned about the globalization from 1960, 70, 1996, 2015, for instance, during 1960s, 70s, and 80s, Nepalese were mostly going to India and not so globalized, I may say. But now the things have changed since 1996 and 1990, and things have been, and we can see like Nepalese going around all over the world, unlike before, where they used to only migrate to India for academic purpose or maybe for the work and other professional purpose. And you have also mentioned about mushrooming of medias both in Nepal and India, and how they can further dilute or aggravate the situation. And you have also mentioned about how Ministry of External Affairs of India was not concerned about how Indian media are manipulating the event. And you have also mentioned about the popular leaders on both sides, Mr. Modi and Mr. KP Oli. And despite having a cordial relationship between them, how EPG is not going as it is expected, that the report is not being accepted by Indian side. And despite that, there have been a coordination in a pipeline construction. And you have mentioned about how China as a new actor is emerging in South Asia, trying to penetrate in economics and geopolitical sphere. Thank you so much, Rishi sir. Now I'd like to go for Bikram Timilsina sir for your initial remarks.
Thank you, Rajib ji. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you, AIDIA, for organizing this very pressing, important issue of India-Nepal relations. And the discussions that has been done until now has really been interesting. I can read that there was especially two kind of themes being talked about. One is that Nepal and India have a special kind of relationship. And what should, whether it should continue like that, there should be change of some kind in it. And this is the most important point of discussion regarding Indo-Nepal relations at the moment, I guess. Let me give you an example how the spatial relationship between India and Nepal is defined in different contexts. I think we have not talked about the main border dispute issue of Lipu Lake 8. We might talk about that little later, I guess, when we discuss about the questions that you have put in the subject matter there. Before that, so how does India understand the spatial relationship between India and Nepal? Let me put a bit of light on that. For that, I like to quote a part of the spatial editorial that the Hindustan Times published, maybe today or yesterday, I forgot, but there is one spatial editorial written about Indo-Nepal relations. And that's pretty much, I think, carries a lot about how many politicians, bureaucrats, and the media persons also try to understand Nepal-India relation is. So in the editorial, it is written that India and Nepal have a spatial relationship, quote unquote. In practice, this has meant that India and Nepal share open borders, no doubt. India and Nepal share open borders. India allows Nepalese to work in India without restrictions. Yes, definitely, that's the case, that's the truth. And Nepalese serve in the Indian army, yes. So because of these particular things, Nepal-India relations are spatial. At the same time, what is not to forget is that Indians also do have unrestricted working rights in Nepal, according to which provision, like hundreds and thousands of Indians are also working in Nepal, which is not stated in the editorial. What is really important to note in the editorial, rather, is that in practice, this has meant that India and Nepal share open borders. India allows Nepalese to work in India without restrictions, and Nepalese serve in the Indian army. In turn, Nepal has both conceded indirectly a role for India in its domestic politics and has been sensitive to Indian security interests. This is the major point of contestation where a departure is needed, I think. So in the presentation of Dr. Bawa Singh, I guess, I don't know, I'm not sure, he might clarify me later, but I seem to sense that kind of view a bit. But in Mr. Rishi Gupta's presentation, there was a departure of that, which is really very important. So Nepal and India, this year, spatial relationship, in no words, in no sense, it means that India has a special right of interfering in the domestic politics of Nepal. That's regrettable. And Nepal definitely needs to be careful about not going against the security of India, but it does not mean that Nepal has to listen to everything that India has instructed it to do. So let me start with what some of the points that Dr. Bawa Singh highlighted. Nepal is a landlocked country, definitely, no doubt, and it is serious. Nepal's trade with India has a big volume. India is one of the main trading partners of Nepal, and similarly, Nepali people working in the defense forces in India. But what does it mean when it is about the relationship between India and Nepal? Does it mean that India needs to get a spatial interfering right in Nepal because of all these things? Definitely no. So see, yeah, as Dr. Subedi highlighted and Mr. Gupta highlighted, spatial relationship is definitely there, roti beti ka sambandha or whatever you call, but it should be understood in a different way. Spatial relationship does not let one party or the sentiment of another. This is really very important issue. So how this spatial relationship has been used by India? Let me refer you back to one of the articles that has been written by C. Raja Mohan, one of the prominent scholars of South Asian politics. He has written in Indian Express today that India has been using this narrative. He has said that as a North Indian peasant might sum up, jiski lathi uski bhais. He with the big stick gets to own the buffalo. Yeah, India has been using it as that, which is not acceptable for Nepal. This is the crux of the problem. And departure from there is what is necessary for making India-Nepal relations better. Nepal has been raising the issues of unequal kind of relations between the two countries from long. One of the, like many of the demands of the Maoist party, which they themselves did not raise very seriously in the later phase of their struggle, but many of the demands were related to, unequal relationship between these two countries. This has been acknowledged by the formation of the Eminent Persons Group in 2016. So what kind of change is needed? How can we revise the existing treaties between the two countries? How can the bilateral relations can be enhanced? These are the questions that the EPG was asked to sort for. So it included 4 eminent persons from both sides, India and Nepal. And by working longer than 2 years, it made its report ready to be submitted to the prime ministers of the both countries. It was said in 2018, I guess July or June, that it was ready for submission, and the time slot was sought after from the Prime Minister of India, Mr. Modi, which has been denied for more than 2 years. India always says that India-Nepal relations is very important. By acknowledging that there is need of some change in it, EPG was formed, which created the report in 2018, and Prime Minister of India has not got 5 minutes to accept the report. Why? I asked the same question to one of the Indian scholars when I went to Delhi a couple of months ago for my research, who said that there is a particular section of bureaucrats in the Indian Foreign Ministry which does not want a kind of change in the India-Nepal relations, which section? The section wants to continue that spatial relationships so that they can exercise the same jiski lathi, whiskey bhais, which is not acceptable to Nepal. So Mr. Rishi Gupta also said that, yeah, India is one of the largest democracy in the world, but it has to be it has to accept the democratic norms and values, and it has to respect the sovereignty of the smaller nations around it as a rising power, I guess, which India is lacking. India has the practice of hegemonic attitude towards the smaller nations, which is the problem. And another misunderstanding, very important point that Mr. Gupta raised, Nepal should be very careful about not letting China play like a stronger role, influencing role, not letting China interfering in the domestic affairs of Nepal. Definitely very important point. Is Nepal does not want India to interfere in the domestic policies of Nepal. Definitely India should not let China come in. And the main problem of Indo-Nepal relations is the same, and why should Nepal be creating similar kind of problem in relations with China? Nepal has to be careful. There might be some sections in Nepal which are not much sensitive about this, but we as the scholars have to put this question to them that it has to happen. Another problem, like there is a kind of misunderstanding in Delhi about Indo-Nepal relations, that whatever Nepal does is in the behest of China, is represented by what Indian Army Chief said before about the border dispute. Actually, the matter is that the dispute, the source of the dispute was the agreement between India and China about making Lipu Lake the connection of the two countries. But the Army Chief of India said that it was on the behest of China. So it implies that there is a kind of xenophobia. There is a kind of fear about China's presence in the region. So without understanding the real reasons and without looking for the evidences about the problem, it is easy to say that China is the major push behind what Nepal is doing, which should be properly investigated and which should not be made public by the responsible parties in India. So I would like to say, so I have made my points about the spatial kind of relationship, yes, but it should be maintained for something good between two, not for the hegemonic presence of India and Nepal. There are certain things, as Mr. Gupta highlighted, many things have changed. Nepalese people have started to migrate to other countries than India. Similarly, there is change in media, there is change in social media, there has been like democratic changes in Nepal. Yes, many changes are there, and it is necessary to make India-Nepal relations as per the need of the contemporary time. So for that, as he said, I would once again buttress that India and Nepalese prime ministers both should be ready to accept the APG report, and about the border disputes itself, they have to see it as soon as possible to resolve the issue before it is too late. Rajib.
Well, thank you so much, Bikram sir. I think you have made a very sharp comments about the issues. Thank you once again. I think you have mentioned about the working rights paradigm to India's security risk concern in South Asia, and Nepal, and why should not Nepal go against the security risk of India concerning the China again? But that doesn't mean Nepal has to give up its sovereign rights. You mentioned about these things, and again, you have touched on the EPG issues and how there is and I think you have also mentioned about the assumed special section in Ministry of External Affairs in India, and how they are not really thinking about this accepting the APG report conducted by both the parties. And also you have mentioned about whatever Nepal does is at a behest of China may not be really true, and this xenophobic reaction from China must be properly investigated by India before raising any accusation. I think you have mentioned about that. Thank you so much once again, Bikram sir. Now I would like to thank everyone for the opening statement, and I think it is clear from the initial intervention from our panelists that everything should be investigated properly, and the dialogue is the solution for this dispute. And we want to overcome the differences. We really want to build a cordial relationship between India and Nepal, and we cannot change the neighbors, but we can make our neighbors to work for us, making a win-win for both the parties. I think you have mentioned about that. So thanking all the panelists. Now I would like to go back to our main research questions. Let's say, as young foreign policy scholars, unlike the old diplomats, politicians, and bureaucrats. I would like to say us as young foreign policy analysts, because we are also the emerging scholars in South Asia. I would like to note in that way. So what is the main issues you think? What is this virtual conflict about the Kalapani and the region around? Is it military issue? Is it political issue? The infrastructure building issue? Raising these questions, I would like to request Dr. Bawa Singh sir to make a very brief comment. I think we have already mentioned a lot in our initial intervention, but now onward, I would just like to focus on the brief comments on the main issues, sir. Dr. Bawa Singh, sir, over to you.
Thank you, sir. I would like to conclude my argument with the two lines from the poem of Dr. Rahat Andori ji, who said, "सरहदों पर बहुत तनाव है क्या? सरहदों पर तनाव है क्या? पता तो करो चुनाव है क्या? खौफ बिखरा है दोनों समतों में, तीसरी समत का दबाव है." So what I make sense out of this line is, to me, is like almost all throughout the world, almost all countries, they have they are facing a lot many real issues, and when they would like to divert the attention from real issues of the people, they would like to these kind of issues. So what I feel, this issue, if there is open border between India and Nepal, I think there should not be any issue related to border. And moreover, this border has been demarcated by the Sigoli Treaty of 1816, and it was ratified in 1816, and since then it has been remained dormant. So I think if we maintain status quo, I think there is no major issue related to this. And if this issue, we can learn a lot from for colonial powers. If we see how colonial powers, they have fought against each other, and how Europe was became battle of wars between among the colonial powers, and right now they have been are more peaceful countries. So India and Nepal also should learn from those colonial powers, how they have ironed out their differences related to borders, and how they have diverted a lot of funds towards their people's real issues. So in that way, India and Nepal should also learn from uh, colonial powers, and they should not make border turbulent. One more problem for South Asian region. So in that way, I would argue, no, if we take the logic of border changing, and if we take the historical facts into account, then I think India should have no control over like many countries. Why? Because Pakistan was part of India, Bangladesh was part of India, and even Myanmar was also part of India before 1935. So similarly, if we go to European continent, so how borders were over there at that point of time, and how they have ironed out their so we should, main focus should be on these issues should not be in case if they are emerging, that should be bilaterally diplomatically sorted out, and the major focus should of the government should be on the real issues of the people, not on nowadays more major focus basically being given on national security. I think national security is not that much important, as the people have been dying of without medicines, without water, without a balanced diet, square meal for the day, etc., etc. So in that sense, the major focus of the government should be on the real issues of the people, not on the national narratives of national security. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bawa sir, for your remarks. And now, may I request Dr. D.V. Subedi sir for your intervention?
Thank you. Well, I think we have already discussed quite a bit on what's the main issues, but I mean, regarding your question about whether it is economic, whether it is this dispute is, I mean, of course, at one level, if you look at the problem, it boils down to a boundary. But then everybody in this panel today, we are talking and looking at these issues from a wider perspective. So a couple of issues emerge in our discussion. So I want to expand on that. And basically one issue here is how India looks at security and stability in South Asia, its own national security. And of course, the Kalapani Limpiadura stretch in the western parts of Nepal and the Lipu Lake, the disputed Lipu Lake, to some extent, to more extent, it is related to the security issues, because India is also looking at the connectivity through building this road between India and China. And we know there is a military presence in that area for a long, long time. And of course, that road, which is recently built and inaugurated, was a desire of the Indian military for a long time. So clearly, we do not deny the fact that why there is a dispute in Kalapani Limpiadura stretch in the western part of the country is because it is strategically important. But the question is, in what way India should deal with this security issues that concerns its immediate neighbors in the first place? And what is India's past records in terms of, looking at the security issues in small neighboring countries in South Asia mean for us? I think these are two important questions we have to unpack. In this discussion today, there was a discussion about how India wants to, I think it is Mr. Rishi Gupta who mentioned that one of the purpose of 1950 treaty was to assure, security and stability in Nepal, right? So, I mean, that kind of narrative is still there in the Indian political circle and in the military circle. And unfortunately, that kind of narratives is impacting on how bilateral issues has been seen between these two countries. But if you look at, how India dealt with the security issues in other countries in the past, and what lessons we can learn from South Asian country, is very interesting. India's engagement with the LTT problem in Sri Lanka in the 1970s had been a disaster. It had some counterproductive effects over the time. And India also had a kind of a similar bad experience with its relationship with Maldives, for example. So my point here is that India and Nepal are both sovereign nations, sovereign states. Oftentimes people talk about small countries and big countries, but I contend that idea. If we look at it from geographical point of view, probably the smallness makes sense. Nepal is a small country in terms of its geography. But if we look at sovereignty and nation's independence point of view, there is no smallness at all. There is equality, and the speakers, Bikram, Timilsina touched on that issue. So the perspective of smallness often comes in the security debates in Indian political and security circle, and that often spills over to bilateral relations between these two countries. So the problem here is, of course, security and of course connectivity, but more over that, since we are discussing it from two countries bilateral relationship, we have to, the conclusion from my side is that if we only look at it from the security point of view, and if India is not willing to accept India's, Nepal's sovereignty and Nepal's autonomy in terms of, how it manages its own security within the country, how it deals with the border issues, I think the problem goes on and on. And the same thing applies on the Nepal side. Nepal has to engage with India, whether it is a security issue, Nepal has to commit to India that it will never let its borders to be used for any kind of anti-Indian, anti-Indian activities and so on and so forth. So I think there has to be sort of a very balanced understanding on both sides, and that will probably take us to the next step or next stage in the bilateral relations. So to answer your questions and to cut the long story short, yes, it is a security problem. Of course, it is an issue of connectivity, but I think it's more a strategic issue rather than just a security issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, DB sir, for your very important remarks. Now I would like to go for Bikram sir on the same issues, please.
Okay, thank you, Rajib ji. The same place, Lipu Lake region has different significance for different countries, like 3 countries. I would say that for India, the main interest of India in Lipu Lake as a whole in the Kalapani region mainly are security and religious. Indian security personnel are located in the area more than 5 decades in there. It's because that particular place is strategically really important to watch the Chinese presence there. So India's main interest in Lipu Lake is security. I would say the second interest of India is the religious one. India wanted to gain 2 interests by constructing the road through Lipu Lake. One is very clear. It's about traveling to Mansarovar, one of the, actually the shortest route to Mansarovar. The Hindutva kind of ideology has been very much strong in Prime Minister Modi's premiership right now, and being able to operate that route would be one of the very biggest slogans of Mr. Modi for winning the next election. So religious interest is another one. The third one is the economic, and it is where the China's interest is connected to. It is because of this reason China and India have also like done a bilateral treaty to make Lipu Lake the point of connection between the 2 countries. But as far as Nepal's interest is concerned, Nepal is mainly concerned about its sovereign right over its land. This particular land, whether it is important from security and strategic point of view or not, India has not been able to show its presence in there. It has even not been able to look after its own people in the area. It has its own lack, but its main concern or sensitivity is its control over its own territory or the matter of sovereignty. So these 3 contesting, different kind of interests are there. So once again, to reiterate, India has economic, security, and religious 3 interests associated with Kalapani region, and the most important and vital being security. And this is also one of the reasons why India has been present militarily in the area for long. In addition to that, let me respond to 2 of the questions that Dr. Bawa Singh raised. One question he raised was whether, I guess this is what my understanding is, the border dispute issue between India and Nepal might be not the real issue. Therefore, it might have been created to divert the attention of the people from the real issues on ground. For example, inability of the government or something like that. Maybe he was referring to Oli government's inability of delivering and trying to raise the issue, which I do not agree, because this is not for the first time that the government has raised this issue. It was last year in November as well, when India issued revised political map, and it was this time when India inaugurated a road through the disputed territory, which Nepal did not create. So actually, Nepal has been on the passive side of this dispute. And Nepal has always been responding to what India does, and India is creating the problem. And there are many problems with the Nepalese leaders who have not been able to handle this issue properly. But the main problem being India's hegemonic kind of attitude regarding solving the problem. So is Dr. Bawa Singh suggested that status quo might be the solution for now, which I do not agree to, because as Dr. Subedi hinted, as far as there is some kind of, long-lasting problem, conflict is there, there's always a chance that it will come again, it will be raised again later. We have acknowledged that Nepal and India have been able to resolve 98% of the disputes. Why not remaining 2 or 3%? So the main disputed area are Kalapani region and the Susta, both of which need spatial attention from the both sides. So technical committees have been formed and have not been able to address this issue. So mainly the political and political attention is needed there to resolve the issue. I would once again say that status quo is not the solution, but addressing the problem which needs the attention, serious attention from the political fronts of the both countries. So that would be my conclusion on this.
Thank you so much, Bikram sir, for your very important remarks. Now I'd like to go for Rishi sir.
Thank
Sir,
you.
the floor is yours.
It was really enriching to listen all the speakers and their comments. Let me start, very briefly about India and its democracy. Democracy as a concept is a very, contested concept. What West sees, what East sees, or what Asia sees as, per se. It's very different because we always have, cultural connections and how, civilizations were born. So basically to say, democracy is a contested term per se. But when we see in the Indian context, I think what Nehru had, said in his, a very well-known book, I can't recall the name, but he said, India is a unity in diversity. So it has all, diversity of all the respects, but it had still been, been able to manage its, issues. Yes, there are, challenges that India faces today internally. There are different ethnic groups, religious minorities, majorities. Still, when we fight, that shows that yes, we are somewhere, agreeing to disagree, or we are agreeing on something. Now coming to, what the dispute looks like, or the nature of the dispute is, I would say that it is a diplomatic, dispute, and it has to be resolved through the diplomatic means. Hyper nationalism or hyper solutions in the, in a relationship which exists between India, barring, I'm not saying that roti beti ka relationship, the kind of ease that these two countries have of approachability. India can approach Nepal and Nepal can approach India. There are no, midway or mid factors involved. So in that regard, to say that, there are issues that cannot be resolved, I don't think so that can be employed in the case of India and Nepal. Third thing about China, I would, completely disagree that Nepal is crystal clear about, Chinese intentions, and what India is raising is a meaningless thing. It has substantiality. And when I say this as a researcher, I say with, confidence and proof. It is a debate and discussion that I would, it will take time and, lengthy process to discuss all the factors. But yes, your leadership directly or indirectly says something. I'm not saying the, leaders at the bottom. Your top leadership has a different opinion of what, what is in public and what you have, going on with China in Nepal. Fourth subject I would, come about is about a small state that India, has been acting as a hegemon, or it, treats other countries as a smaller nation. I think I must appreciate India in this regard, because till date, when we go through the border issue, India has released, I remember, 2 or 3 statements since November, whatever the issue was going on. In first statement said, India said the same thing, that it does not violate. In the second statement also, India said it does not violate, meaning that India is not agreeing to, what you call a dispute. Now, when the dispute is in, dispute is in the making, it is how you convince that power. But when you say that, somebody has a position, but you call that position, it's a diplomatic position, but when you call it a hegemonic position, that doesn't, work out. A country can have a diplomatic position, and that is what India is having right now. Again, I'm saying that in my presentation also, I said that, a border dispute is just a symptom of a longer dispute that will be there in the future. It is just a symptom, and both the countries need to look into it, and especially India, because the pin can always be pointed at India, that as a big country or as a bigger country, you have something at your stake, and you are not ready to listen to what. And obviously about security relations, I do not think in modern day world any country for that matter will succumb to the pressure, or will accept that if something is risking somebody's security, they will agree to what they have been on. So the issue is very one has a very clear position, one is having a position now. In those situations it will take time, but as I said in my conclusion also, that the 2 countries need to sit across the table and talk about it. And it is faulty of India, it is faulty of India at least, that the foreign secretary level talk that's been initiated, and I think it should be conducted in time. And as I mentioned that the Nepal national security policy, where in 1950 treaty we said that we have mutual respect for each other, and suddenly it becomes that a border blockade kind of situation becomes a national security threat. It is something to think for. It is a very critical issue that India has to think about. But overall, I think all the speakers have somewhere or the other, agreed upon that, it is an issue that needs to be addressed. And but yeah, I'll conclude on that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rishi. So in the meantime, we have a lot of attendees attending this webinar. I would like to request our attendees to forward us with your questions, if you have any specific questions, so that I can deliver it to our panelists. With that being said, now I'd like to go for our second interventions regarding border sensitivity issues. What attempts have been made in the past? If there is any success example in the past, or failure, or why is this kind of thing going on? And why is this reoccurring time and again? Regarding these questions, I would like to go with Dr. Bawa Singh, sir. Sir, over to you.
First of all, I would like to clear that the point made by Bikram. No, he has taken my argument in context of Nepal, but I have made it very general terms. Like if you take throughout the world, if you take all the countries, right now, if you take the USA, what is happening over there? So I mean, a lot of unemployment is there, a lot of violence is taking place. He has been, President Trump has been failed in a number of areas. So in that sense, what is happening? I mean, when lot many issues are there, so in order to divert the attention, they used to resort to some other kind of tactics. Similarly, China, what is happening over there? COVID has created a lot of problems in terms of economy, in terms of investment. A lot many companies are moving from there, etc., etc., and moreover, a lot of problems for the Communist Party as well. So in that sense, what is now doing? They are now resorting to aggressive policy in Indo-Pacific region, particularly South China Sea. How they are dealing with Hong Kong, how they are dealing with Taiwan, and how Indo-China border has become turbulent, etc., etc. So similarly, number of cases are there where a lot many issues are there. So in order to divert the attention from real issues, if we take the case of like India, a lot many migrant, what is happening with the migrant labors, how is the health security, how is human security, etc., etc. There. So when these kind of issues are there, so generally other national security issue or traditional security issue used to jump up. So my argument was that, but no, Vikram has taken it in this context of like Nepal. Similarly, to me, it does not mean either a country is small or big. What my argument is, all countries should be treated equally, and every country has a very right to protect its sovereignty. As a student of political science, so when we used to study what the element of state, and in that argument they used to say no, sovereignty is the important element of the state. So sovereignty has to be protected at any cost, either it is small nation or a major nation. So in that context, Nepal being a small country definitely has the right to protect its sovereignty. Moreover, India, of course, it's a very big country in the South Asian region. If we take geographically, 80% of the geography comes from India only. If we take economy, around about 80% of the economy of South Asia only comes from India. And around about 3 trillion US dollar economy is there, and I think 2.5 trillion dollar US economy only comes from India. Similarly, if we take the army, total army of the India is also comprising 80% of the total economy of this. No, so in that sense, India has some issue. I mean, the small countries or neighboring countries, they do have some issues regarding the hegemony of India. Of course, India should not behave very equal and justifiable way with the neighboring countries. Then only its acceptability in the South Asian becomes very relevant. Otherwise, of course, if it's not, then naturally geopolitics will take place, and no external powers will have their major say in the regional issues, etc. So in that sense, India, I have written one article. I think after the constitutional crisis of Nepal, geopolitical fault line of India's neighborhood policy, where I argued that India should have treated Nepal in a very equal manner, and otherwise, that issue which had come up had not been taken immersed at all. So as far as border issues resolving is there, so number of examples are there. If you take the Europe countries, they know a lot of issues related to border was there, and I think amicably they have resolved. And right now, almost all countries of European countries, they have been living peacefully, cordially, and amicably. Similarly, if we take the case of China and Russia, lot many issues related to border issues were there between both the countries, and now by signing protocols and treaties, they have sorted out their border disputes as well. Similarly, right now, if we take the case of South Asia, Indo Bangladesh border issue was there, and I think both the governments, India and Nepal, they have amicably sorted it out. So in that sense, Indo-Nepal border, of course, it has been immersed, and we have to take into account what is the history of border issue between India and Nepal. And my again argument is this: if it is open border, I think uh, uh, it seems that much serious issue. Of course, my co-panelists have been raising the issue, it is a strategic issue, and stationing Indian Army over there becomes major security issue. And if it's locating Indian Army in the Lipule, Kalapani, and Limpiyadura areas is a major security issue for Nepal, then of course lot many people like from Nepal, they have been working in Indian Army. Similarly, a lot many I mean lot of exchanges, military exchanges have been taking place between in both the countries. So in that sense, I think open border is supposed to be a major issue between both the countries. It's supposed to be a major threat to their national security, etc., etc. So lot many border issues throughout the world have been resolved. So taking lessons from those resolution of those borders, India and Nepal should also sit across table and resolve the border. And I think European continent is also the best example from where we can learn how the border resolution can take place. And so in that sense, if a border issues has been resolved, I think both country, it is the beneficial for both the country, for economy, for welfare policy of the people, for security, stability, etc., etc., not only of these two countries, but at the larger context for the region as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bawa sir, for your remarks. Now I'd like to go for Dr. DB, sir.
Okay. Well, I think there's a very interesting discussion going on here. Let me first very quickly respond to your question about what mechanisms are there or could be there to resolve this issue, and then I will take a few minutes to clarify some of the points from my previous and also from this discussion. Okay, in terms of the formal mechanisms to resolve this problem, actually we have a history that there were few tangible and formal mechanisms and attempts made in the past to resolve this problem. For example, there was a joint technical committee which was formed in 1981, which recommended to resolve the border problem, and almost 80% of the border problem has been solved. Although 98% of the border problem is solved, although that technical committee was dissolved in 2007. And of the 2% on disputed lands which has not been solved, Lipulek is one area, but also we have problems in Susta as well. In 2014, there was another attempt. There was a high-level foreign secretary level joint committee which was formed, but that has also been despunct, and this has not been functional. And further, from the first visit of Prime Minister Modi in 2015, there is an EPG, and Bikramji talked a lot about EPG and its problems and so on and so forth. So if we look at the history, there have been some technical committee and even joint secretary level committees formed and try to resolve this problem. In addition to that, there has been diplomatic exchanges between two countries time to time. But what is problematic, and I would say not just problematic, but what is misperception about diplomacy between India and Nepal is, for example, Rishi Gupta ji mentioned that India has maintained its diplomatic position when it comes to the disputes and so on and so forth. And of course, Nepal did the same. For example, when India and China had this, understanding about Lipulek in 2015, Nepal sent a diplomatic note. And when India introduced the new map in last year in 2019, having Kalapani region in India, Nepal's parliament objected it and sent a diplomatic note to New Delhi and so on and so forth. But what is the problem about the diplomatic relationship between these two countries? And this panel today is discussing in one way or other a lot on that, is the lack of level playing field in the diplomatic position. When it comes to diplomatic position, no matter how the two countries engaged in diplomatic relations are bigger or small, there has to be a proper level playing field when it comes to the decision. But we haven't seen historically, there is unfortunately no level playing field between these two countries. And of course, a problem like border dispute, which is looking at from the conflict management point of view, conflicts over the borders are the hardest thing to resolve. And particularly when there is security issues involved and attached to it, it becomes even harder. But again, coming back to the question of level playing field in the diplomatic relations, oftentimes when there is any dispute or any issues between India and Nepal, India has time and again taken punitive action to resolve this problem. You know, we go back to in 1980s when during the time of Rajib Gandhi, we had this border closure by India. And also in 2015, we know that India has taken a punitive action by unilaterally closing the border when India was not happy about the provisions in the Nepal's new constitutions. So this is not a good example of a level playing field in a bilateral relationship, unfortunately. And India is a democratic country. And Rishi mentioned that India is, he talked about democracy as a contested topic, but I don't really agree with that. You know, democracy, so there are certain principles of democracy as a means of best possible means of system in the world. There is less debate about it. Perhaps there are certain debates about democracy in certain countries where there are religious, ethnic, and so many other issues that come with the idea of democracy. I don't want to go on that debate because that takes another separate debates about what kind of democratic country is India, how strong democratic institutions are or are not in India, how much democratic consolidation has already happened in India. We don't want to go in that because we also have seen the rise of right-wing populist government in power. And when the right-wing populist government is power, around the world, we have seen democracy has taken its illiberal form, what Farid Zakaria calls illiberal democracy. So that takes us to completely different direction to our discussion. I don't want to go on that. But my point about diplomatic level playing field is that India has time and again taken punitive actions to deal with India over the matter of differences between these two countries. And this is one of the reasons why there is an increasing presence and influence of China in Nepal. We should not forget this issue very clearly. For example, whenever there is any dispute between India and Nepal, be it a diplomatic dispute, be it border dispute, be it dispute any other issues, the common narratives on the Indian side is that Nepal is playing up with anti-Indian narratives. But I'm saying it from the very beginning today, the issue of land is so much attached to the collective identity of people that what Indian media and Indian public think about anti-Indian nationalism in Nepal is actually patriotism. We should also be careful that there are two different concepts. So nationalism is attached to the identity of certain ethnicity and nationalities. But when it comes to the border, there is sort of unity within Nepal. So it is not just a hyper-nationalism as someone would call it in Nepal. It is not anti-Indian nationalism as someone would call it. Inside the Nepal, the kind of anger that has been provoked by this border issue is actually clearly an example of patriotism rather than anti-Indian nationalism or hyper-nationalism. And we should also not forget that unless we change this kind of destructive narratives on both sides, in the Indian side, that everything that happens in Nepal is anti-Indian, it is happening in the behest of China, and so on and so forth. These are destructive narratives. And this doesn't help to maintain the diplomatic position of a country like India. And India being the largest, one of the oldest and largest democratic countries in the world. India being the, being the largest democratic countries in Asia, the only way to contain China's expansion in India is, in South Asia, is India playing as a responsible power and being a responsible democratic power. And unless there is a level playing field in diplomacy, unless there is an acceptance and acceptance of the, sovereignty of neighboring countries, India will be far away from being a responsible power. And even if India is not a responsible power, then it will be counterproductive for India's own national security it is trying to maintain. I want to quote you from a paper that was recently published by Brookings India and written by Shiv Shankar Menon, the former national security advisor in India, who says that in this new publications, who says that for India to rise, I mean, there is clearly Indian aspirations to rise as a rising power, as an emerging power in the world, and for India to rise, according to Menon, India has to maintain its what he calls strategic autonomy. And what he means by strategic autonomy is it is characterized by strengthening itself within the country, consolidating its periphery, and external balancing. And this can only happen by engaging in diplomatic relations, which has a certain degree of level playing field. Otherwise, it's not going to help. That's my point. I want to stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rishi. So you have really made important remarks and very long remarks.
In the meantime, we have
no worries, because
of the nature of the question. Anyway.
Yes, exactly. I can understand that. In the meantime, we have very important remarks from Dr. Chungku Bhutia, ma'am, from Sikkim. Ma'am, unfortunately, due to the time constraint, I cannot introduce you as panelist now, but I can read on your behalf. She says, I have a small intervention. Nepal-China relationship cannot be ignored when it comes to the security of South Asia. It cannot be denied that the missing pieces of Nepal's development or related issue has been found in China in evidence in terms of economic aid. So the inclination between these two nations dates back to 1980s. Second, in terms of India-Nepal issues as of now, the conflict between the two nations could ultimately result in the winning of a third nation. Healthy dialogue is the need of happy hour, she says. So thank you so much, Chungku Bhutia ma'am, for your intervention. Now I'd like to go for Rishi sir, if you are still hearing us. Yes, I can see her. Save now.
I think there is a question about in the chat box about it says border wall not like China Great Wall, but some sort of defense agreed by both sides manageable. The pillars disappear in remote terrain reason as well. So it's been a long debate when it comes to building a wall or a kind of fencing. The two countries have been talking on. And a lot of discussion I sense in Nepal is going on. I was talking to your Prime Minister Oli's foreign policy advisor a few days back, and I asked him the same question: how do you see border management when it comes between India and Nepal? And he said Nepal, it is not public, but somewhere in the security policy that is there, which is not made public, the recent one. But he says that we are looking borders, regulated borders, basically. I did not understand what he mean by that. But yeah, somewhere he says that the traveling through land borders should be at par with the traveling through air. So meaning that you would require passports, if not visa. A passport will be the only mode of entry and exit. The second thing that has been in the discussion is about who will pay for the fencing of the wall. Is Nepal ready or India? I don't think so. India is willing, and if the other country has resources. So it's a long border, and if resources permit, I think the two countries should sit together and talk about it, because it's really important. We both have security issues. It is not just the security threat that comes from the north for India. It is about a lot of illegal trade, arms, and that India has been, facing, as well as Nepal. Both the countries, if you talk to border security forces, Nepal armed forces at the border, and ITBP in India, you will understand that both have their sense of insecurities, and somewhere or the other they wish some kind of management. But I think it will take time. The issue must have been discussed. That this is my sense, that it must have been dealt in the EPG report, which is yet to be made public. But yeah, I think it is just about who pays for the wall. Yeah, that I'll conclude on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rishi sir, for answering the questions, intervening on the relevant matters. Now I would like to go for Bikram, Timilsina sir.
Rajib, are we talking about the second question?
Yes, we are still in the second question.
Okay, so yeah, I would not like to repeat what has already been said. Just like what Dr. Subedi said, there were different mechanisms that have taken place and have solved many of the issues, like until it worked for nearly 3 decades, a joint technical committee, and resolved many disputes. But since then, there has not been any substantial progress in the problem, though there were foreign secretary level committee formed for solving the issue. I guess because that committee did not take the issue separately. It might even be true that the leverage of the problem is not that much effective to be solved by that particular committee. So I think there is need of higher level political committee. There should be some level of discussions among the prime ministers of the both countries. So it needs, I think, the special attention from the political fronts for solving the mostly sensitive areas of dispute between India and Nepal, because it has been talked about, foreign secretary level, other committees could not resolve those disputes. And for like, how can we strengthen Nepal-India relations on that matter is we have discussed about, like, Nepal and India are not rival countries. They do not have ideological kind of problems. They do not have long-lasting enmity or something like that. They have spatial relations. They are close neighbor to each other. Just like two kind of problems are there. One, that India feels a bit insecure about Nepal being getting closer to China, and Nepal feels insecure about India's approach towards Nepal as a small state. If these kind of misunderstandings are addressed by the political levels, frequent kind of dialogue, open-minded kind of dialogues between two countries in different levels, I think this should not be big issues. Like, I mean, who pays for the border fence, how to regulate it? It's all technical things. The most important things, I guess, are a kind of dissatisfaction, a kind of lack of trust among the, to some extent among the people, and to some, mostly in the political fronts, in the military fronts, and even in the media, there has been that kind of misunderstanding. One point I wanted to make clear about on what Dr. Bawa Singh said. He said, he opined that, like, I mean, if we talk about the territories in that sense, like by going to the distant past, Pakistan was India's territory, Bangladesh was India's territory, or something like that, which is not much relevant in case of Nepal, because Nepal is not asking for the greater Nepal that was part of Nepal before 1816 Treaty of Subedi. Nepal is claiming a small stretch of land which belong to Nepal, is the Nepal's claim according to the treaty that they signed. I mean, British East India Company, Nepal signed in 1816. So according to Nepal, it has always been Nepalese territory. So it's not much relevant about like Nepal, Pakistan, or Bangladesh being the former territories of India. It is not much relevant to claim that. I mean, Nepal's claim of Lipu Lake Limpiadura region is not relevant. That is my point about that question. Yeah, let's go ahead.
Thank you so much, Bikram sir, for your very important remarks. Now I would like to go for our next round of questions. Has there been any model for the resolution of this kind of dispute? Maybe we can make it short and precise as far as possible, because I see we are in third questions and we still have question and answer round if time permit us. So maybe we can make it, try to make it as precise as possible. Over to you, DB sir.
Okay, thank you. Well, very quickly, in the interest of time, of course. Yeah, I mean, look, I think what kind of model is there is difficult to predict, you know, because my view on this matter is that we can, of course, think of and talk of different approaches to this problem, but models has to come out of the dialogue between the two countries. Of course, there are different modalities. Bangladesh and India resolved this border dispute, but clearly that model might not work in the case of Limpiadura and Lipulek, for example, or Susta. The bottom line here is, I agree with what Bikramji just said. To find any model that works in the interest of both countries, there has to be a higher level political engagement, beyond bureaucratic engagement, above bureaucratic engagement. There has to be sustained engagement, because up to this point, the engagement between these two countries has been a bit of patchy. You know, there has been problem, and then there is some kind of escalation, and there is dialogue, and then it just forgotten for a while, and so on and so forth. So there has to be a sustained engagement, higher level engagement, and try to find solutions and models out of that engagement. But having said that, both countries has to overcome the myth and destructive narratives that we elaborately discussed in this discussion today. The myths and narratives and counter narratives about security, about the diplomacy and the level playing field, and also about anti-Indian sentiments, India's hegemony, or China's interventions. These kind of views are there, but we have to come up with a kind of a conclusion and modality through a creative and constructive engagement and dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, DB sir, for your important highlights. How you mentioned about India-Bangladesh model of boundary and maritime boundary may not be relevant for Nepal, and maybe it's a different kind of scenario we have when it comes to border dispute between Nepal and India. I would like to go for Bawa sir for your comments.
So I think everybody has to come out of the veil of hyper nationalism, and a realistic view has to be taken of the real facts, and sustainable engagement, diplomacy, and dialogue, and all types of diplomacy, track 1, 2, 3, 4, have to be put in place. And I think only diplomacy and dialogue, the only best way, sitting across the table, only can give a solution of the border issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Rishi sir, if you have any comments, please proceed.
I think a lot being said. Wonderful to listen all the speakers. And if somebody else has any comments, I will be very happy, or any specific questions, I will be happy to address.
I am not seeing any questions by our attendees right now. So let's go to our final part. Now we are into our final part. As a young professional looking closely on the issues, what suggestions, recommendation could be given for the current standoff for both sides to have any very good relation, resolving it with negotiation, dialogue, maybe something like that? I would like to go for Bikram sir.
Yeah, very interesting. Like, I mean, those two questions, two last questions are interrelated to each other. Even we could have connected that as well. So I second the thirds by Dr. Bawa Singh and Dr. D.V. Subedi on this. I do not think any like existing model for the dispute might work for sure. We can try for different ones, but the most important thing and which is happening right now is the engagements, like sustaining kind of engagements from higher level to like lower levels. That's missing, that's not happening. That should start as soon as possible. And most importantly, as we have already talked about, since different mechanisms have worked and have not been able to resolve this particular disputed areas, so the most important thing is that the political level discussions about this issue has been very urgent, very important. There are some weaknesses from both sides, Nepal and India. Nepal has been, careless about not raising this issue for long for sure. In Nepal should not repeat that mistake again. Like this, it's like what India does is one thing. Nepal should keep raising its concerns about the issue, and India is a responsible rising power while dealing with a country with whom it does not have many problems. It should come open-minded and listen to Nepal, and Nepal should listen to India. They should look for like what kind of historical evidences are available. We understand that the particular area in dispute is very important from a strategic point of view for India, but it does not mean that India does have right to have like possession of the land because it is important for India. This the point of departure should be like, I mean, the land according to the historical records, which country has possession of this, and from that vantage point they should start the dialogue. They should be open to each other, and they should try to reach the conclusion, I guess.
Thank you, Bikram sir. Now I'd like to go for Bawa Singh sir. Bawa sir, Singh sir, over to you.
What are the questions, sir?
As a final part, we are into the conclusion, and what kind of recommendations and suggestions for resolving this issue?
I think my main point is, which I would like to make here, is whatever the points of concern on part of Nepal that has to be addressed, that should be addressed by India, related to security, related to geopolitical conundrum, putting Nepal into that one, and on part of Nepal, whatever the concerns on part of India, like hegemony, big brother attitude, positioning of Indian Chinese, Nepalese territory, or trade deficit, trust deficit, etc., that should be that's supposed to be taken care of by India. Then only we can normalize relationship with the Nepal. Similarly, on part of India, some concerns are there vis-a-vis Nepal, and those concerns should be taken. That concerns of India should be taken into account by Nepal, so that a relationship, bilateral relationship, should be normalized. The crescendo of cordiality should be heightened, and I think that is the only way, best way to having good relationship between India and Nepal.
Yes, thank you so much, Bawa sir. Now, for short remarks, Rishi sir, please.
Yeah. So when you say as a young scholar, only thing I can say is that I, as a researcher, want my policymakers, at least in India, because the old school still exists. And as I said, we need to understand the changing nature of Nepal in all the terms. So when I'm doing a substantial work, or my colleagues, or people working on Nepal, our government is giving a lot of funding. We have Social Science Council and other funding agencies who contribute enough to do a quality work. As a researcher, I would say things should be taken into policy framing. These inputs at least should be on the table, because more often I think our research only goes into dustbin and maybe in libraries of further research. It should be taken seriously. That's what I can say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rishi sir. At the end, we have a I would like to introduce someone to make his remarks, and we'll be closing it very soon. We have Professor Rajesh Karat of Center for South Asian Studies, and he's also from JNU and currently the Dean of Humanities at Mumbai Universities. He has been involved in policy making of Nepal and India, and I would like to unmute him and let him know that he can just speak on the issue, but I cannot unmute him. Let me see. It's not working now.
I can unmute.
Okay, Rajesh sir, over to you for your remarks, and we will be closing very soon. Please try to make it very brief.
Yeah, just only 2 or 3 minutes. Thank you, all of you, for having a very vibrant discussion. I wish the diplomats of the foreign policy makers of India and Nepal both should have this open-hearted and very open-minded dialogue and the discussions on India-Nepal relations, because this is a very, very important to open up your mind, because the kind of issues about the Chinese intervention and the India's hegemonic positions and how Nepal feels insecure or not secure, these kind of issues have been discussed here, and particularly those young scholars who has a different opinion from the old school of thought from 1950s, 60s and the 70s. And we must appreciate and can have a different kind of occasions where you can bring the another set of the young scholars and have a discussion and come to the conclusion. This is what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rajesh Karat sir, for your final intervention. Now, I would like to close this very soon. Thank you very much for all our respected panelists and our attendees. Thank you so much on behalf of AIDIA, and personally, thank you so much. Had really been a very fruitful discussions, and thank you so much for your theoretical and practical intervention measures that could be applied to solve this dispute. We are willing to coordinate and collaborate in the days to come too. Thank you so much. We'll be saying goodbye now. Thank you.
Thank you very much,
care, everyone.
and thank you all the speakers.
AIDIA.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.
Thank you all.